Okay, thank you all for being here. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Ad Hoc Labor Subcommittee and start by introductions.
So moving Pete Peterson.
Zimmerman, Dick Trainee.
Tim Steele.
Bill Evans.
Amanda Moser, Deputy Clerk.
And if we could have anybody who's representing an organization, just for the record, please indicate who you are, that you're here.
Barbara Huff, Techness, Teamsters Local 959.
Daniel Rapaski, IBEW, and Anchorage Central Labor Council.
Justin Roberts, IBEW.
Tracy Hillhouse, Employee Relations, Labor Relations Director.
Bill Sims, Operating Engineers, Local 302.
Jason Allworth, Local 302, Operating Engineers.
Derek Scher, Anchorage Police Department Employees Association.
Joelle Hall, AFL-CIO.
Dale Miller, Teamsters, Local 959.
Tim Morgan, Teamsters.
Bill Mears, Public Employees, Local 71.
Okay, thank you. We have a copy of the agenda. If you haven't got one, it's there. It's pretty brief. Are there any questions or changes to the agenda? Mr. Trainee?
One, I understand that Jennifer has got a new ordinance in the addendum process for introduction. I'd like to know if we have a copy of that or where it's at. It's hard to speak to a document we've not seen yet.
Right.
So where is it?
Let me address that comprehensively. There is a document. I have a copy of what I think is the amended copy that was emailed to me. I don't think the plan for today originally was that we were going to address those changes. We received a lot of comments from various labor groups over the course of this week, specifically related to Ms. Johnston's ordinance, that I was hopeful that we would be able to get answered in this meeting. That is not going to happen, primarily because Ms. Johnston is not here today. She's out of town. And with all the questions, it's going to require some input from various departments before we can get a comprehensive. So as far as today's meeting, I don't think we're really going to get into Ms. Johnston's plan. What I'd like to do is schedule a follow-up meeting to this in which we have all those questions presented. Ms. Johnston's here to answer the questions, and in advance of that meeting, we'll have the current amended version.
Let me ask you, is it close to 37 like we saw the last time?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, it's like 29 pages, I'm told. I've not seen it yet. I hear it's going to be the addendum for introduction on Tuesday.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. It's from what I see, and I haven't studied it, but it's very similar to the version she already put forward, with some changes that have been made based on some comments she has. But there may be more changes.
That is not coming from this committee to the assembly, because I saw on the agenda where the chairman said a product is coming out of this body, and I don't know if there's a product that we've got coming out of this body. So I wonder about that, because Jennifer's definitely isn't the product coming out of this body, the vote of this group.
Much like your ordinance that you
Right.
introduced was not coming out of this body, neither is Jennifer's ordinance. The purpose, and it's good to bring that up because I just want to remind everybody, the purpose of this subcommittee was not the analysis of Ms. Johnston's ordinance or of Mr. Trainee's ordinance or any other. The purpose of the committee, and it was found in order to try to find ways to avoid, if possible, the costs that were possible for having the referendum on the ballot in November. That was the task given this committee.
Sorry, I'll wait till you're done.
No, Mr. Trainee.
The cost is the only concern. The other concern could be under city law. If it is in fact repealed in November, then those items cannot be readdressed by the assembly or the mayor's office for 2 years. So that's what we're dealing with. If the public does in fact in November repeal 37, the elements of that cannot be dealt with for 2 years by this administration or the assembly again.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. That is true, but as far as I'm aware and what I've been told when I was asked to chair the committee, the purpose of the committee was to address the cost issue. Obviously,
Since
the fact...
you mentioned cost, let's talk about that.
Let's talk about it. Go right ahead.
From what I hear, thanks to the media, because we haven't been told this yet.
Well, I think we're going to be told this.
Let's go on then. Sorry, I'm going down to her. Thank you, sir.
Sure. We've, since there are no other issues on the agenda, we'll say the agenda is approved, and we'll move on to new business, which is the report from the municipal clerk on negotiations with the state clerk's office. Ms. Moser?
I communicated with Gail Kanumiai, the director of the Division of Elections with the state of Alaska, by email yesterday, and I specifically asked her 3 questions. One, if the state agrees to put the referendum question on the state's ballot. If they do, will there be a charge, and what steps do we need to take from there? And Gail's response by email was that the MOA referendum question will fit on the state's ballot. She stresses that she wants to make it perfectly clear that the only reason it can be on is because it is a single, short, one question. It will not be able to work this way for future regular municipal elections. The only costs incurred to the MOA will be for publicity, recount, or court challenges, and they are currently preparing a memorandum of understanding to be reviewed and signed by both parties.
Mr. Train, in line with that, could we ask legal to tell us if the MOA mutual understanding agreement has to be approved by the assembly? In other words, do we, as an assembly, have to agree to this memorandum of understanding with the state for it to appear on that ballot? We need to have that definition given to us by the city attorney of record. Mr. Wheeler.
Mr. Wheeler, can you address that at this point?
I'll look at it. I don't have an answer for you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any questions for Ms. Moser? Just in talking before with Ms. Jones and yourself, are there any concerns that the clerk's office has, the municipal clerk's office has, with respect to placing this on the state's ballot as far as any of the logistics or control issues that you'd like to address?
I think that we have to begin to understand what that will look like to have it on their ballot. So far, we have been exploring the idea of a concurrent election, so I don't think we've fully understood what it will mean to have it on the state's ballot. Specifically, what should happen with the recount or court challenges, because we wouldn't have any control over the election because it would all be run by the state. So I think that is definitely something that our office would need to evaluate as we move forward.
Mr. Green?
Question. Amanda, do you know by what date we have to have this memorandum of agreement into effect with the state to meet the ordinance assembly passed? I think it had a 7th of July date to have it done. So from my perspective, that has to be in effect by the 7th, or?
It's my understanding that it has to be in effect by July 7th.
And the or is, if it's not in effect by July 7th, the referendum automatically rolls to the April election?
Yes.
That's correct.
Mr. Peterson and Mr. Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I'm understanding what you said just a couple minutes ago, there won't have to be separate employees hired by the muni, and there won't have to be separate sign-in stations, and the ballots won't have to be counted separately. Is that correct?
It is my understanding that the state is agreeing to allow the election to appear on their ballot. So it would not be a separate concurrent election. It would be on the state's ballot.
Thank you.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, have you asked for it in writing? We haven't received it yet. Is that the case? Is she going to send us something?
I'm not sure the answer to that. Gail and I communicated through email yesterday.
Oh, okay, so you have it in writing, it's just email. Anyway, I guess we would need something a little more official. We still got a couple of weeks.
Ms. Peterson?
After Tuesday, the next scheduled meeting is until July 8th, if I'm correct, so July 7th comes ahead of that. So
I believe that was Mr. Crane's question. And just so, and I know Ms. Jones is out, but currently, just so the clerk's office understands in their negotiations with the state's clerk's office, and we'll await Mr. Wheeler's determination as to whether the assembly has to approve that agreement in order for it to take effect. If it does, as they were alluding, if we can possibly have that done in time before Tuesday, yeah. So if you could follow up with Ms. Moore.
Absolutely.
state clerk quickly, that'd be great. Any questions, any comments from the public with respect to Ms. Mosier's report as far as the clerk's office goes? Ma'am?
Amanda just wanted to point out that we do have a split district here in the municipality, so make sure that we're watching House District 12. It lies both in the municipality of Anchorage and the Massillon Borough, so you do have a split district. So it's a point of concern, something you should be paying attention to.
Any other comments, questions from Ms. Mosier? Mr. Steele?
No, I don't from this one either, I'm sorry. I just basically wanted to thank folks who really had reviewed it and had given us some feedback on things. Good feedback. But in terms of the stuff that we've already received, I'm glad that folks are looking at it.
And I would just ask, again, Ms. Mosier, to report to this committee as soon as you have something in writing from the clerk that can be reviewed. I appreciate it. Any other questions? I want to apologize for dragging you all here on the hope that we'd be discussing Ms. Johnston's bill in greater detail. I think we all will all benefit from not trying to do that in the absence of Ms. Johnson and without the full participation of all the city departments. I think we'll get you a much better product if we delay that to our next meeting of the subcommittee. And we'll see how this goes with the clerk's office and try to schedule that meeting within the next week or so and get you notice on that. Any other issues that the committee would like to bring up on this very abbreviated subcommittee meeting?
I guess if the purpose of the ad hoc subcommittee is to find solutions to shorter spending costs or delay, if you will, action, have there been any positive steps other than Ms. Johnson's ordinance order?
No, I think what we have on, I think the four issues that have been put forward, the four proposals, if you will, are Mr. Trainey's proposal, which has been introduced at the Assembly already, Ms. Johnson's repeal and rewrite ordinance, which is still under discussion and which is being introduced, I understand, at this next Assembly meeting. And the other options don't actually require a ordinance, but the other option is to let it go on November, depending on what the cost is, or whatever the cost is, or letting it roll over to April, which is a municipal election, and would have no additional costs involved for having it on. If there are other proposals out there, we haven't come up with them.
Okay.
I had thought that there was, and maybe Mr. Wheeler can confirm this, that there was a second potential proposal from Ms. Johnson, which was not a repeal and introduction of amendments to AO 37. Can you confirm that, Dennis? Because I think that you were on the same email I was.
The addendum item does not contain language for repeal. It only contains amendments to 370.
And just for clarification, it's amendments to existing code, not to AO 37. She's not amending AO 37, she's amending existing code, which even though she's not introduced a repeal with it, I believe that, as we discussed at our first meeting, to do it correctly, it would require probably a repeal of AO 37.
The language in the AO that
bring the document.
relies on a separate repeal, i.e. Mr. Trainey's.
Does that answer your question?
Right, because I may have misunderstood what you said. I thought that you had said Ms. Johnson's repeal and rewrite. And it was the repeal question I had, not about the rewrite.
Yeah, I think in order to implement Ms. Johnson's ordinance, it would require a complete repeal of AO 37 as part of it.
It's my understanding that for what Ms. Johnson wants, you'd have to have the repeal first to bring the document back into effect originally, and then you can modify it from there. So.
Carefully.
Carefully. We only do things carefully, sir.
My concern is I do not want to see this spread out further. I mean, if we have to do this in April, that's almost a year and a half from collecting the signatures, and that's not timely service to those people who supported that. And so I hope we find a solution to it. It seems to me the clean way is probably repeal, and then if we've got some amendments I think we want to look at, we should look at them. But I really don't want to get into the next April on that regular.
Mr. Honeman.
Since the subcommittee has, no disrespect, but since you're looking at all options, I might suggest that, along with what Mr. Steele was saying, and thank you, Mr. Trainee, is perhaps we do that, we move to repeal, then we go to the table in good faith with labor and craft a good labor ordinance that comes up with some changes, which I think is what everybody really wanted. So I would make that pitch openly to this committee, to the subcommittee. I'm not sure, I apologize, I'm not tracking. Who's on the subcommittee?
It's myself, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Steele, and Ms. Johnson.
Got it, okay. So I'd make this pitch to the members that are present, that we perhaps consider that as some discussion that the subcommittee may have before the next meeting.
Is that in any way different than really what you proposed, Mr. Trainee?
No. Okay.
Yeah, I think
You've got to have a clean repeal, and then we can take a look at, like what Jennifer's talking about.
I guess I would just urge the subcommittee to make it clear that we want to make sure this is not a closed door, just us, so to speak, coming up with labor, that we're actually looking a little bit more of a cooperative. Everybody seems to understand why the purpose of it is. Unlike where sometimes we look at ordinances and people want to know where the hell we came from. Sure.
Well, that's what we were trying to do when AO 37 S2 is amended, was given to the Assembly. Let's sit down and negotiate those things that we can deal with. So that option was never given to us. It was, we were just told, take it because we've got to have this to do negotiations. Negotiations happen without 37 into effect. So now is a chance for us to go back and look at those things we've reached common ground on.
I was just going to mention a couple of items in here are just changes in gender items, and I think that is actually covered. Doesn't that the ordinance that we passed, Patrick's ordinance with regards to de-genderfying it or whatever it is, would pertain to this too, and so that complicates what we're looking at.
That was
Anyway.
Just for the charter?
Just so the subcommittee is clear, and I appreciate the fact that you've suffered through my fit and start chairmanship. That's what happens when you put the new guy in charge of something after a week of being on the body. But what I would like to see happen with the subcommittee, my plan, is that in our next meeting we get everybody fully confident in the answers on Jennifer's ordinance, because that's one thing we have substantively out there, so that everybody's satisfied their questions have been answered, and they've had the opportunity to provide their input, and we do appreciate the input you've provided so far. I'm also asking Mr. Wilbur from MOA, the Transportation Department, to give us an update on the status or any changes, along with Mr. Wheeler, on the MOA transit protest issues for the funds, just to make sure we have the latest information on that. And finally, what I'd like to do is then, at that point, once I think we've exhausted all the substantive issues, to have the committee members weigh in and see what their individual recommendations are as far as going forward to what we can give to the Assembly. We might not have, a 4-0 agreement on that. We may each have, one of the 4 proposals as our favorite, but we'll give each of the committee members the opportunity to say what they would like, and then I will just report, probably in an Assembly information memorandum, to the Assembly what we did, what the outcome was, what the proposals were. If there is consensus on a particular proposal, we'll certainly make that clear, and if there's not, we'll explain what the issues were. Is that, any questions on that as a plan or a goal?
Mr.
Tucker.
Assuming that Ms. Johnston's proposal is included on the agenda, would that at introduction then be, would it be your vision that, as chair, that upon introduction, that would be referred back to the committee here?
No. What I understand is happening, and Mr. Trainee may be able to help me out there, because Mr. Trainee's proposal has already been introduced, and the chair of the assembly recognized that this committee wasn't finished with its work, I believe Mr. Trainee has put off public hearing and action on his.
Actually, the way it's worded is, public hearing is set for 24th. The chairman is going to ask to delay the vote on it being adopted, which takes 6 votes, to the meeting in July. That's the verbiage. I can read it to you, word for word if you like.
I get the gist. And the idea, what we're trying to avoid is to have serial meetings at the assembly level where we're discussing pieces of this, as instead of having it all at one time for everybody to digest.
Right, I guess that's what made me wonder if the mechanism in vision would be that after introduction, Jennifer's would be referred back here so that you would proceed with your plan about recommendations. So I guess that was where I just sort of had a gap.
I don't.
So I apologize.
No, and if I'm missing a procedural point, it could be my problem. I didn't anticipate the assembly having to refer it back to us as we're still discussing it, even while it sits at the assembly level. Maybe there's some procedural thing that has to take place in order to make that happen. I'm just not aware of it. Ms. Gray
Thank you,
Jackson.
Mr. Chairman. And just for clarification, Mr. Trainee's ordinance is scheduled for public hearing, and the public hearing has to be opened regardless of what happens after that. I just wanted to move that on.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's what I gathered. So there will be public hearing on Mr. Trainee's ordinance this coming assembly.
But it's the end of the agenda, so who knows what time that will happen.
Never know. 6:30.
Now we've got watershed issues, we've got other issues.
But as far as your question goes, Ms. Tucker, I'll work with Patrick to make sure that we coordinate.
I'm just so sorry I even brought it up.
No, anything you can bring up is probably helpful at this point, so I appreciate it. Any other issues, questions? Mr. Sherk.
Thank you, sir. It sounds like there's been a slight change in the document maybe that we got, and this is one of the problems that we had with AO 37 initially, is we were always one document behind what the assembly was going to be working on the date that we didn't know when the meeting was going to occur. One of the things that I would ask, and I know that everybody has asked that we participate in the process, and I think I can only speak for myself that we're happy to do that. But in order to do that effectively, we're going to need to know a couple of things. One is we're going to need to know what document we're working off of in advance of the meeting so that we can constructively critique and analyze it at least 5 business days out. And I think that's a pretty fast turnaround, particularly with all legal staffs. The other thing is that we have hard scheduling of the meetings with adequate time for give and take on the discussion of the matters, and there's adequate members of either the committee or the assembly present so that they can hear the answers and ask additional questions. Because it sounds like we're endeavoring to undertake some aspect of the bargaining process, and if we're going to do that, we need to have an opportunity to present the best information, have the best questions asked and then answered, and have the relevant decision makers present. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just one comment for those of us who don't remember when maybe weren't here because of AO 37, we put together a task force who made some recommendations, and there are some real clear ordinance changes that make requirements on how we go about when there's a new document. And I think that all of us need to refresh our memory on that so that we do the right thing on behalf of the community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jackson, Mr. Holman.
And I want to go back to the committee, and it kind of ties in with what Senator was asking earlier. I get a suggestion, but I think it was a question first. And I know you're fairly new as new chairman on this. I'm just going to give you the scenario that I know that we did a couple of real major changes, and we're still working on one. Transportation is one. Totally we're working on with another. Spice. We didn't work independent of the stakeholders who actually participated. There's no requirement at a committee to have public. I'm glad to see your agenda, public comments, member comments. I think it's wonderful. That's the participative process. It takes a little longer, of course. Obviously, people might have emotion and bias. But it's good because I believe we then come with a document, I think Mr. Sherwood agreed to earlier, we come with a document that at least has included that information from the stakeholders so that it's not like, okay, here's what we're wanting. And then it becomes basically more of a mandate or an edict. And I think that's where, if what I heard what Ms. Tucker was asking in the response, if what Ms. Johnston has proposed has not been before the subcommittee for discussion, it certainly hasn't been before the body. We haven't had a work session on it, and I know it, and if we did, I'm sorry I missed it. So I'd love to have the participation process where we can peel this apart yet again, not repeat what we had with AO 37. It was fairly painful and it didn't serve us well. So I would suggest that we go to the committee. I'm the 3/4 of the committee here, that we use that as a participative process to develop and craft a new ordinance regarding labor and negotiations. That it's just, I just want to reiterate, I understand if we repeal, that's one step. Then we get together doing the transportation change, the towing change, and then we participate. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Steele, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry. But the discussion is a good discussion. It just seems to me that our first goal was to deal with the cost factor. And then our second goal was to address things and get comment word on folks. It just seems to me that the clean way to do it is to limit it first off, and then that takes all the money issue in terms of the referendum and all that stuff off the table, and then deal with changes that are necessary to the ordinance. And I know that even Jennifer's ordinance, the one we have now, have that process of repeating it in it as well. It just seems to me we've got the deadline coming up in terms of the ballot measure and all that stuff. And so we need to, it seems to me we need to move on and do what we have to do, not trying to play politics with the whole thing, but trying to get a good product. So I guess that's what, at this point,
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Just to comment on Derek's comments. Understood completely. It will be my main focus to make sure that before we have our next meeting of this subcommittee, Ms. Johnston's, what I hope would be final version of that is out. It's to the committee members. It's available to the public, and then we get you plenty of notice before we have the date on the committee. We're kind of rushing between trying to get everything caught up with the other ordinance, but it's more important, I think, as Mr. Steele says, to get this done right, and that's really what we want to do. So we'll be working on that. And please feel free to contact me at any time if there's things you need or things you want or things that we're not doing to get to you, because we do want to. We may not agree on the end product, but we definitely want to make sure that everybody is comfortable with the process.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, and I can't speak on behalf of any other organization other than my own member organization, but I think it would be very helpful, and with all due respect to Assembly Representative Johnston, the dialogue in our last committee hearing, discussion that went on, there were a lot of questions specific to her ordinance that were actually addressed to Mr. Wheeler, and I think from a labor perspective, it would be very helpful to get a written response from the administration on where they're at with all of these changes. Do they support taking safety issues out of negotiations? Do they support taking scheduling issues, which are near and dear to every single public employee in the city, out of negotiations? And if they do, why? Because we have had this system in place for over 20-some years. And these are basic, Mr. Chairman, they're basic issues. They are basic to collective bargaining. Why are they looking? Do they support expanding, taking public employees' right to collectively bargain away? Every single employee sits in a position right now. When they're hired, they know going in that they have representation. And then the city drafts an ordinance where they can pick and choose for whatever menial reason to take that right to collectively bargain away from these employees. We haven't heard anything from this administration on where they're at with those issues and why. There's another probably half a page or so of changes that are probably legit. We need to update the ordinance. And our organization will sit here and agree that there needs to be some of those positive changes going forward. But if this committee can do anything, repeal the wrong and right it. And I know my organization would be willing to sit down, whether it's this committee or the entire body as a whole, or with the administration, and talk about what are those legit issues that we probably should change to update the ordinance. We're not going to sit here and agree to those basic premises of collective bargaining. Safety is a major issue, and to take that safety and put it in the hands, and no disrespect at all to this administration. I have been involved with the city of Anchorage since George Sullivan in 1973 was mayor. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of changes, but the basic premise of collective bargaining, there needs to be that level playing field out there of some sort. Once you start back, whether you give it all to the union or you give it all to management, it destroys that process. And I just, for the record, moving forward, there's a willingness on our organization, and I can't speak for the other groups, to get on with where we're at right now. Almost every single one of us have gone through negotiations under the old, not the new ordinance, successfully. And this administration has done the same. Can we drop this and move forward? And we sat here this afternoon and wasted, I think, everybody's time. It's frustrating. It's real frustrating. And we all have jobs.
Thank you for those comments. I mean, and others may want to weigh in on that, but I think it'd be a mistake to, the ordinance that Ms. Johnson has put forward, as far as I know, is Ms. Johnston's ordinance and not a reflection or necessarily even in cooperation with the administration. I know Mr. Wheeler was involved sometimes because assembly members either will use Ms. Tucker or sometimes we use the law department just to draft the ordinance because it's, a legal document. I don't think that should be necessarily a reflection that what's in that proposal by Ms. Johnson is the position of this administration. Administration I don't even know what the administration's position is on that, but Mr. Wheeler? Mike.
Going to echo that sentiment, I don't have any authority to speak on behalf of the administration. My role so far has been to draft what the sponsor requested. I'm not here to advocate for it, or try to advise as to what the administration's position is, any provisions it might be. Just for that.
And just so we're clear, because of I think this committee, there's been a tendency to try to morph this committee into that role you were talking about that should occur. I think Ms. Johnston's ordinance was originally, as I understand it, proposed, and with Mr. Wheeler's assistance, to try to find an ordinance that would be administrative as opposed to legislative, and thus meet the burden of not being a referendum issue. It was more of a legal issue. It wasn't necessarily intended to be the be-all and end-all of labor negotiations. And this committee wasn't established to be that good faith bargaining group that would sit down with labor and come up with a better ordinance. That just wasn't the task. And some of the confusion in this group and probably some of the frustration you're feeling is because that's not what we're tasked to do. We're just trying to get to the assembly, the the issue of, how do you avoid this cost on the November election, maybe the end result is what you suggest. And there'll be certainly, I know there's certainly members of the body that would support that wholeheartedly, and you'll certainly have an opportunity to address the full assembly on that and indicate that that's where you think you should go. Comments? No
I
comments?
was going to ask you if you'd support the repeal of 37 if we reinstitute an agreed to ordinance after we repeal it. Would you support that?
Unlikely.
Okay. I want to know, because I listened to you talk the first time about waste management rights, and you were very clear that if those rights are given to the management, that's non-negotiable, they're management rights.
Yes, I do understand the concept of what management rights are.
I know, because I'm using your verbiage. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Any other questions?
I would just make a comment, going back to your original trying to look at this administratively. Our general counsel has reviewed completely the ordinance or the draft ordinance that's in front of us, and we do believe that if that was passed, we'd be back in court again. So just for the record.
Yes.
Keep in mind, that may not be the final version as with the 37. She's got another one up there. So get your counsel to look at the new one.
We're keeping her busy.
But the points are well taken in terms of collective bargaining is by definition collective. And everybody ought to be involved in it, including the administration in terms of what they want to do with it. And it seems to me that that wasn't our mission, and we just need to get this deadline out of our way, and then get back to the amendments that have to take place. The more we talk about it, the more convinced I am that it is a two-step process.
Chairman, I'm going to echo what Barbara said, that we have a document in place that works well for the city of Anchorage that has for many years. I think for my frustration is that the Assembly built a philosophical document, and that's why labor roared up and says, wait a minute, this isn't about efficiency, this is a philosophy. The only way you're going to get our buy-in is you sit at the table with us and you help us craft this new law. Kudos to Ms. Johnson for trying to write something new, but once again, it was written in a vacuum without labor's participation. And until you get us at the table to work with you on changing the ordinance on those issues that you feel must be changed, as opposed to those you want to have changed for the philosophy, we're not going to be in agreement. You have to get us to the table with you. And I know from the many meetings that we've had as a result of AO 37 that we're willing to come and help you craft an ordinance that we will buy off on. But we've got to be there on the front end and not, here's the document, what do you think about it? We want to be there and help you craft it.
Anybody else? Gone longer than I thought it would. Seeing no other comments, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.